Welcome to episode 5 of the Drakos Dottir podcast. Woohoo! Today's episode is focusing on sheep, specifically a couple of heritage breeds. I do some talking about fleece and processing from the workshop, and also in our Meet the Maker today, Jenn Monaghan from the Fibre Workshop, who's researching and writing a paper on the pre-worsted wool industry in Norfolk, and also describes how using the Anglo-Saxon breed, the Norfolk Horn, and how it's been saved from extinction.
Or we had an astonishing amount of freeholding peasants. So we weren't really subject to that kind of manorial control that was going on elsewhere.
That explains so much about Norfolk people. In compelling Chronicles today, local heritage guide Becci Smith describes the history of the witch trials in Norfolk and how they are linked to the infamous Salem Witch Trials in America.
I have a list of the accused here and what their charges were. So you had Mark Prime, who was charged with the use of witchcraft to bewitch one Robert Howlett, the son of John Howlett, and the use of sorceries to find lost property.
And in Contemplation Corner, emotion code healer Shirley talks through how her therapy works, and I can add my testimony to that, and how our bodies can store trapped emotions.
Because you can just pick stuff up. If people are feeling a really strong emotion of something, it can be absorbed quite easily if you're empathic.
First of all, let's head to the woods. What's occurring from the workshop? All right. From the workshop today, so I'm looking at fleece. So a really important material in the Dark Ages was wool. So much so that I recently read an article that claimed if the Vikings hadn't had wool, they would not have gone a Viking. Links below. I've also briefly talked to Jane Delar and about her warp-weighted loom, and in future podcasts, spinning, and other makers specialising in woolcraft, such as the awesome Nid of Elnir, championing knarl binding. So, sheep. I'm going to mention just a couple of the breeds I'm working with. Remember what ruing is? Where the fleece falls away naturally with certain breeds, still happening today. I've been very kindly sent some Soay fleece by a gentleman called Chris, who has a growing flock. He gathered it from around his flock's field. The Soay breed originated from the island of St Kilda and is thought to be the breed's most closely linked to the first semi-domesticated sheep. I also have some Shetland fleece, and some of these fleeces are from shearlings, which means it's the first fleece that has been cut off the sheep. So they're big lambs, really, more. And this first fleece is softer than subsequent ones. I have a few of these I've washed and I'm now trying to drum card. Some of them are full of neps, which is a bit of a job. And I wish I'd done things in a slightly different order. The Shetland breed have characteristics like being able to survive harsh conditions and on a poor diet, and can trace its route to Iron Age Scotland. Also, traditionally, Fair Isle garments are made from Shetland fleece, a distinctive heritage knitwear featuring star designs from Fair Isle between Orkney and Scotland. And the one I've got to show you some clips about today is Jacob's fleece. This sheep breed can have 4 horns on its head, great for sharing the mead around. Some say this could be the oldest sheep breed in the world, with origins from the Middle East, hence the name, and distinctive 2 colours in the fleece. And in these clips I fuss around with some fleece, which I was given by Carol from Odin's Et. Cheers, mate. When you lay the fleece out, you can really start to see how skillfully it's been shorn off, leaving a kind of flattened sheep outline, minus head. Massive. Here we have a most massive bag of Jacob's fleece, which I think once I have got it cleaned and so on, when I'm spinning, I've had several discussions with people about whether to spin just the lighter fibres and just the darker ones, so you end up with 2 different colours. Then if you spun those 2 threads together, you would end up with a speckledy wool. Or you could just spin the white fibres and just the dark fibres. So yeah, lots of possibilities. And I'm going to start what's called a suint bath. So that is a way of cleaning the fleece with bacteria in a fermentation vat. Woo! That I'm going to give it a go. And then if it's too stinky and horrible, I'll go back to, old bits of shampoo and that. So I need a container to put my fleece in and leave it for like 3 months. I'm just looking for the buzzard, I can hear her. So let's get into these fleeces. So these fleeces very kindly donated, swapped from Carol from Puppet Vikings and Odin's Et. And it's just really interesting to see, to start with. Same breed of sheep. This one quite a lot more of the darker fleece than this one here, and they'll come rolled up from the shearers. So let's spread one out and have a little looky. Whoa, she's a beauty. So when you spread the fleece out, you can start to see the bits of the body come from. There's a leg, there's another leg, down the middle of the back, and the other legs, and then this bit over the neck. So that means this end, yeah, is the tail. Full of crap. So the next stage in sorting a fleece is called skirting, because you go around the edges of it and remove all the bits that have got solidified cack in them, because you can't spin that. Also, different parts of a fleece could go to different end products. So there might be a part of the fleece that was softer than another part. Get rid of your VM as well, your vegetable matter. It's not too bad actually, there's not a lot of bits in that I can see. Well, maybe there's a few. Haha! Then you've got the length of the fleece, which is called the staple. This is actually really soft and lovely. And it's got curly whirly tiny little bits on the tips. Look at that. Okay. I think maybe I'll use half of this in a fermentation vat because it's so nice. This is the problem of working on your own, and why I do reach out online quite a lot to people and go, what would you do? Oh, what would you do? I don't know. and people are very accommodating, very helpful, and I'm very appreciative of it all. So I just picked the fleece up and gave it a shake, and all these second cuts fell out. So you don't want them getting tangled up in what you're doing, because it just causes annoyances when you're trying to spin. Be gone! This is what I've ended up with. He's massive, and this is what I've pulled off. So if I put him into a fermentation vat, it's got to be warm enough for bacteria to populate in a suint bath, and it will smell. But you can leave it for 3 months, and that's looking quite appealing at the moment with the other jobs I've got to get on with. So yeah, let's just do it. It's getting a bit warmer. Okay, get the fleece, put it in something with a lid. Let's do it. Fill her up, Joe. Should probably use rainwater. I don't have rainwater, so it might take longer for bacteria to cultivate. Delicious. Look at this! Most gorgeous evening. And I'm trying to collect some of these bad boys. Well, they're nice and green and young. I'm saving the juice up in containers, and I don't know if it's going to work or not. I've got no idea. But when you do winemaking, you can put a Camden tablet in to help preserve the wine within the bottle. Because I'm using recycled bottles that aren't necessarily as clean as can be as well. Ugh. So yeah, I'm just going to get some of the tips of these nettles, of which there are quite a few, and then I can have the young, fresh, brighter green colour of the early nettles as they come up. Snip, snip, snip. Plus you've got to soak them overnight on all this, so I figure it's my end of the day job before I go home. Get these on, put some boiling water over them, so you steep them, just leave it. Cut, steep, take the liquid off, squeeze the leaves out, and then put some more water on afterwards, and you still get a nice bright green, so we shall see. More about another heritage breed, the Norfolk Horn, from Jenn in the Fibre Workshop a bit later on. First, a piece of local history. Compelling Chronicle. I'm joined now by Becci Smith, my friend, heritage tour guide from Yarmouth and fellow pagan. Hi, Becci.
Hi, Jenn. It's lovely to see you and speak to you.
Lovely to see you too and hear from you. And we're going to talk now about an aspect of paganism, which is witchcraft.
Yes, so predominantly I'm going to be talking about the witch trials all the way back in 1645 that hit Great Yarmouth.
So In the medieval times, there was quite literally witch hysteria in Norfolk and Suffolk.
Yes, so even before we call them the main witch trials of England, which was from 1645 to 1647, although it didn't spread outwards from East Anglia, it was mainly Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridge and Essex where Matthew Hopkins conducted these so-called trials. But you need to go further back. So during sort of the Tudor period, there were witchcraft trials, but not to the extent of later years. So basically, you could be tried as a witch, but the laws are a bit different. You could be charged with the crime of witchcraft, which could be several different things. So, for example, if you cast a charm to find a lost object, that would be considered witchcraft. And you could be brought up on charges. However, they were a bit lenient. So what would happen is if you pleaded guilty, it wasn't an automatic death sentence. However, if you were then brought up again on the charge of witchcraft, it was then, and you pleaded guilty, you were then automatically sentenced to death.
Wow.
It's a really kind of bizarre one. And James I, who we know as James I of England, but at the time he was James V of Scotland, he really kicked off the persecution of witches when his bride was sailing over. There was a really bad storm and she very nearly died at sea. And a group of witches in Scotland claimed that they'd caused this storm, which outraged the king. And he went on a huge witch hunt in Scotland. You know, a lot of people were persecuted, were tried and found guilty. He even went so far as to write a book called Demonology, which was all about how to find witches, how to interrogate them, how to try them. And it kind of, that then came over to England when he became king in 1603. And then he introduced the Witchcraft Act in 1604.
That really links with Shakespeare, because one of the reasons why Shakespeare wrote Macbeth was to appease the new king of England. And in fact, that's what the witches do in Macbeth, is they make a sea storm as one of their spells. So how interesting is that?
Everybody's familiar with Macbeth. We all study it at school.
Yeah. Yes.
And those very famous words from the witches, you know, in the opening scenes and everything.
When I taught the teenagers Macbeth, it was really hard to get them to imagine how it must have been to see people on stage portraying witches one weekend, and the next weekend you're going to an actual witch trial and witch burning potentially. And so it felt really real what they were watching. And that's to do with as well the legacy of Macbeth the play as being a cursed play, is because they thought that spells were happening on the stage as the play was going on.
And like you said, it's playing with the themes of witchcraft and how widely believed it was. The Witchcraft Act wasn't actually repealed until the 1950s, but I'll go more into that a bit later on. And when James I became king of the United Kingdom, he then introduced the Witchcraft Act in 1604. So anybody who was accused of witchcraft could then be tried, and 9 times out of 10 was found guilty. Now, where we differed from Scotland was we didn't burn witches. Burning was for mainly for heresy and heretics, you know, whereas here we hanged those accused of witchcraft and found guilty. There's been sort of a few trials recorded, you know, in England. I mean, mainly sort of the most written about one was the Pendle Hill witches and sort of Mother Demdike and the women there. There doesn't seem to be a lot, and it isn't until sort of the start of the Civil War that the witchcraft hysteria starts to take off. And it's really interesting observing history, because you find that during times of conflict, of war, certain people do get persecuted. The country at that time was ripping itself apart. So who do we blame? Well, we won't blame the king. We won't blame Cromwell. We'll blame witches. And because of this, you then get Matthew Hopkins, Now, Hopkins is a really interesting character because not much is known about him before 1645. He was born in Suffolk to a Puritan father who had his own church. And so he was brought up in the Puritan faith. But apart from that, not much is known. We know that he was possibly a failed lawyer. We think he was also a landlord of a local tavern. But that's it. Not much else is known. And then he meets a gentleman called John Sterne in 1645. Now, John Sterne was a very radical Puritan. You know, he really believed in those puritanical beliefs that excess was really bad and you shouldn't have iconography in churches, and anything, you know, a little ruffle on your neck was really, really bad and frivolous and everything. And he seemed to have turned Matthew Hopkins into a radical, basically. And it's then that they say, well, there's witches, it's witches who are causing all these issues. And they actually attend a witch trial in Essex, and they attended this interrogation, and basically they employed methods to gain a confession. So they approached the Earl of Hardwicke basically and said, look, we want to in our own right interrogate and preside over witch trials throughout East Anglia because it's a huge problem. Now the Earl of Hardwicke gave his permission, and that's when, this was in 1645, and this was when the hysteria of the witch trials in East Anglia started. So they actually tried 18 women in Essex, and all 18 were hanged.
Oh, God.
So, yeah. Also, men were charged with witchcraft, and there's a few men who were also hanged, but predominantly it was women. And what you find as well, when you look at the research and the historical records, is a lot of the women who were hanged, who were found guilty, were older, were either widows or spinsters, and had no money.
So in a way, a kind of social scapegoat. You talked about England's scapegoats in the Civil War. Now we've got like narrowing it right down to the scapegoat in your community.
Yeah. And you see that all the way. And what people seem to think is that Hopkins reigned terror over the whole of England, and he didn't. He only reigned over, as I said, Norfolk, Suffolk, Cambridgeshire and Essex. That was his sort of domain. And he only did it for 2 years. And in August of 1645, he then came to Great Yarmouth. But Hopkins was a very clever man, both Hopkins and Sterne. So what they would do is they would approach different corporations, different towns, different villages, saying, we're seeking out witches. Have you got a witch problem? We will come in to the town and we will interrogate them. We will try them and we will find them either guilty or innocent, all for the princely sum of £23, which again back then was a hell of a lot of money. Now, as far as we know, when he came to Great Yarmouth, he asked for the money, but he was never paid. Now, just to give some scope, as I said, 2 years. And in those 2 years, well, just under 300 people were killed.
Wow, which is an incredible amount.
Yeah. Yarmouth was no different, really. There was 15 people originally accused in the witch trials. Now, the trials started in September, so they needed to gather evidence first. 4 were released without charge, but 11 were put on trial. And it's interesting. You can actually see the records from the cases which were held at the toll house. Yarmouth differed from a lot of places because it had its own court. Unlike the Lowestoft witch trials, where the trials had to be held at Bury St Edmunds, so they were held at the toll house in September of 1645. And on record, there was a lot of people there. The bailiffs, you had the recorder, who was Miles Corbett, who was MP for Great Yarmouth. He was also the court recorder, but he was also Cromwell's lawyer.
Oh gosh, wow.
Because the town of Great Yarmouth at the time of the Civil War was parliamentarian, so there was that little underlying current of, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And it was just scary, really, really scary for the people involved. And the methods used to pull confessions from these men, these women, were horrific. Now, we don't know if these methods were employed at the Yarmouth Witch Trials. We assume that some of them would have been. So stuff like food deprivation, sleep deprivation. So what they would do is, as soon as an accused would fall asleep, they would chuck a bucket of cold water over them and walk them around to keep them awake for as long as possible. One of the methods used was the pricking of a witch. And what it was, there was a special knife designed which had a retractable blade, because beliefs at that time was that if you're a witch, you wouldn't bleed, So what they would do is they'd press the knife to the skin, and of course the blade would retract into the handle, therefore the person wouldn't bleed, therefore they were a witch. Even the accusations, so for example, if you couldn't recite the Lord's Prayer word for word, you were considered a witch. If you couldn't say the alphabet backwards was one of them, and considering how many people were illiterate back then, even familiars if you had a pet cat. Now, we know that ducking took place at Norwich. All it was there was a rope tied around the accused's middle as a safety rope. They were then sat cross-legged with their little finger tied to the big toe on each foot. So you had your legs crossed and your arms crossed. And then you were thrown into the local body of water. Now, if you floated, that's magical. You're dealing with the devil, therefore you're a witch. You're guilty, you're going to die. However, if you sank, you were innocent. And if they could pull you out in time, you'd live. You go, here's a little bit of money for the coffers. And you found that with the majority of the witch trials at that time, that if you had money, then rather than hang, you could pay. If you were found guilty, you could pay your way out. I have a list of the accused here. So, and what their charges were. So you had Mark Prime, who was charged with the use of witchcraft to bewitch one Robert Howlett, the son of John Howlett, and the use of sorceries to find lost property. You then had Maria Verby, or Mary Verby. It depends on which document you look at, really. There's several different names, but it's the same person. Now, she's interesting because she actually had 5 indictments against her of bewitching the infants Elizabeth Holmes, Lucy Lambert, and Augustine Thrower, and also Bridget Wade, the wife of Hosier John Wade, and the entertaining of evil spirits. Now, what the entertaining of evil spirits was, basically talking with the devil, or having a familiar, or saying, I'm jealous of my neighbour, they've got much more than me, how can I get that? So that was what the entertaining of evil spirits was. So they were her charges. You then go on to Alice Cliswell, Brigitte Howard, Maria Blackburn, Elizabeth Dudgeon, and Johanna Lacey. They were all brought up on the charges of the feeding and entertaining of evil spirits as well. You then had Elizabeth Bradwell, who again was really interesting. There's her testimony is actually out there in print and is at the Norfolk Records Office. You can actually read her testimony. And she was also charged, like I said, with feeding and entertaining of spirits, the use of sorceries and witchcraft to bewitch spinster Susanna Linstead and Henry Moulton, the child of Alderman John Moulton. Now, What her story was is that she was visited in the night by a tall gentleman, all in black. Now Elizabeth had knocked on John Moulton's door asking for a little bit of bread, and he turned her away. So she knocked again the next day and said, look, okay, fair enough, I'm willing to work for you. Have you got any laundry that needs doing? He said no. And then this gentleman turned up and said, you know, if you just sign my book, I can give you all the riches in the world. And she turned him away. The next day she went back to the Moultons to ask again if there was work, and she was turned away again. And again, the gentleman turned up, just sign my book in blood, which she then did. Now, it goes that she actually made a wax effigy of the child, Henry Moulton, and buried it in the local churchyard. And as soon as she did that, Henry Moulton then fell really sick. Now, when Hopkins and Stern turned up and she was accused, she confessed. She also said that she had a familiar in the shape of a blackbird that would come and sit on her hand and peck at her hand, just between her thumb and her index finger. And there was a mark there to show that this animal had taken her blood. And they went looking for the wax effigy, but they didn't find it, because obviously it being wax, it's either been damaged when they were digging for it or it deteriorated. But the weird thing was that as soon as she confessed, Henry Moulton recovered. So she was brought up on those charges. You also have other names in there, but we can't seem to find them. But I will go back to those who we've already said about. So Mark Prime was for the use of witchcraft to bewitch Robert Howlett, the son of John Howlett, in News of Sorceries to find lost property, was found not guilty. Maria Vervey, who had the 5 indictments against her of bewitching children and the feeding and entertainment of spirits, she was found not guilty, which I found very interesting, and I'll tell you why. Because Alice Cliswell, Brigitte Howard, and Maria Blackburn and Elizabeth Dudgeon were all found guilty of the feeding and entertaining of evil spirits, along with Elizabeth Bradwell. She was also found guilty. And the last person found guilty was a lady called Joanna Lacey. Now, what's interesting is Maria Vervey's 5 indictments, you'd automatically think, well, she's got to be found guilty. And yet she was found not guilty. But yet hers is a lot worse than what Elizabeth Bradwell's was. Yet she was, you know, sentenced to death.
That's really interesting. And what is lovely as well, Becci, is to read their names, to bring it down to the fact that these are people who were put on trial, and these people existed. And this isn't just something that you study in history. To say their names brings home the true horror of what these people had to go through.
Yes, definitely. I mean, this is it. A lot of their names aren't spoken. And I mean, in sort of the, I know at Essex now they've got a memorial, and a lot of other places have now got memorials, but a lot of the people who were executed, their names have been lost in the mists of time. We're really lucky because the records have been kept, so we know their names. And the 6, you know, it was the Yarmouth 6, and they were all found guilty and were sentenced to die. They were held. It's discovered that it wasn't actually that long. It was about 4 or 5 days. And the night before the hanging, they were then taken to a place called Whitegate Farm. And they would have been held there for the night before their execution, before being taken to the gallows, which were on the North Deans, where Jellicoe Road is now. And it's just behind the back of the Great Yarmouth Racecourse. As I said, 6 were found guilty, but only 5 were hanged. And the only person to escape the hangman's noose was Johanna Lacey. And again, it's where research comes into play. I've been talking about the Yarmouth Witch Trials on my Gory Stories walk now for 6 years. And we never knew why Johanna Lacey escaped the noose. We always just assumed that she was a young woman and that she was pregnant, because at the time it wasn't seen to try the child for the crimes of the mother. And what we assumed was that they let her off to have the child and then hang her after. But there was never any record. Now, I found out 2 years ago, along with another gentleman called Roger Silver, who runs Cobham Miniatures, and he's actually written a booklet on the Yarmouth Witch Trials. Johanna Lacey was actually a very old woman, and it would seem that it was wasteful to waste the hangman's rope on her on someone who was going to die within 3-4 months. So she only escaped because she was considered too old.
Wow.
And
Gosh.
that was, and these 5 women lost their lives during a time of, I mean, there was food shortages, the country was ripping itself apart, and it's just a scary time. And the fact that Hopkins was allowed to do this for 2 years, is terrifying. But karma does come into play a little bit. So the story goes, if you believe the Hammer horror films, is that Hopkins himself was then tried as a witch and burnt at the stake in 1647. However, this isn't true. Hopkins and Stone made a hell of a lot of money doing the witch trials all throughout East Anglia in those 2 years. However, on August the 12th, 1647, Matthew Hopkins actually succumbed to TB and died. And what I found really interesting was Hopkins was only 25. Stern then went on to write a book similar to demonology called A Discovery of Witches. And then we have to fast forward over 50 years, because that book was then used at another infamous witch trial in America, which was the Salem Witch Trials. And there's huge links to Yarmouth there as well.
So we cut across from the English witch trials to Salem in America to pick up the witchcraft trials story next.
Yes, so we're now travelling from East Anglia to Salem, Massachusetts, and the year is 1692. And much like the trials in East Anglia, where so many people were accused, over 200 were accused in Salem, and 20 were executed.
My goodness.
And the Yarmouth link there is that 2 of the women executed at Salem were from Yarmouth, and there was a 3rd accused as well. So it's got its links with Yarmouth.
Wow, that's amazing. So those women travelled across? Were they Puritan women?
They were. So they were the town family, which if you have a look again at Norfolk Records Office and Great Yarmouth Minster, their names are on the marriage and baptism charts. And they actually came to Massachusetts in 1640 with the Pilgrims and the Puritans. And they lived in Massachusetts first, and then they moved to Salem in 1651. Now, Joanna Town was the first accused 22 years before the Salem Witch Trials.
Oh, gosh. Wow.
And she was the mother. Now, she was accused, but she was never actually tried for that crime. Anybody sort of reading about the Salem Witch Trials will know that it was mass hysteria, but there's this sort of dark underbelly, very much like the British witch trials, where it was a lot to do with money and land grabbing, and people saying that these people didn't deserve the land, that they should have it and stuff. And that's where a lot of the witch trials in Salem kind of came from. We're going with the Yarmouth link, and there is 3 accused during the 1692 Salem trials. Now, Mary Easty was accused of using her spirit to afflict various people and families within the township of Salem. And she was actually found guilty and hanged on September the 22nd of 1692.
Gosh.
She was the first town sister to be accused, found guilty and hanged. Now, if you've seen the film The Conjuring, Mary Easty is mentioned in The Conjuring as being the spirit.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's the same Mary Easty, but I very much doubt that it was her who caused all that horror. I suppose her name was used for effect. But like I said, Mary Easty was the first. Sarah Cloyce, the second sister, was also accused of the same crimes, and she was put on trial at exactly the same time as her sister Mary. But she escaped the noose. Nobody knows why, but she was actually held in prison quite a while. She wasn't released until January of 1693. And then she was given compensation from the state of Massachusetts for being wrongfully imprisoned. And in fact, there was a play written all about Sarah Cloyce called 3 Sovereigns for Sarah. Now, the third sister was Rebecca Nurse. Now, she was the oldest of the town sisters, and she was actually 73 years old when she was accused. Now, she lived on a little homestead. You know, by this point, she'd had all her children. She was a widow, and she was actually a very pious woman. She was a real pillar of the Salem community. So for her to even be accused in the first place was really unusual. And she was accused by the Putnam family. Now, the Putnam family play a very, very big role in the Salem witch trials. A lot of the accused were accused by them. And at her trial in June of 1692, she was actually found not guilty. But as soon as that verdict was read out, the accuser's children started having fits and throwing themselves on the floor and saying, oh, it's her spirit, it's causing us to, you know, jolt and everything. And the judge had to change his mind very quickly, and he changed it to guilty.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Now,
on this seemingly new evidence.
Yeah,
of people inflicted.
Yeah. Because there was such uproar as well from the public gallery that she'd been found not guilty. Now, a petition was started up by the majority of the community of Salem to get her freed. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be. And she was hanged on July the 19th of 1692. And she was the second. You know, it's awful that a 74-year-old woman who was very pious, who was a pillar of the community, was accused. But then if you look at the whole of the Salem witch trials, it was mass hysteria on an epic scale. You know, over 200 accused, 19 hanged, one was pressed to death.
Oh,
you know,
gosh.
But, you know, and that's the Yarmouth link. If you've read or if you've seen Arthur Miller's The Crucible.
Absolutely. Taught it many times, mate. Yeah.
So it's actually based on Rebecca Nurse's testimony and her trial. And it didn't matter how good you were, how pious you were, if you went to church 7 times a week, you know, sometimes twice, that you could still be accused and found guilty. So during Cromwell's time, yes. I mean, obviously, the Yarmouth Witch Trials took place 4 years prior to Charles I being beheaded. But so the Civil War was raging on. During that time, with the Puritan thoughts and ethos and doctrine, women were the weaker sex. and they were so much more susceptible to sin and being tempted by the devil and the frivolity.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? You know, all those jobs they had to do on a daily basis just to keep, you know, their lives going, and yet they still had time to frolic with the devil. I don't know how they managed it, Bex.
I know, neither do I, you know. It was John Stern's book, The Discovery of Witches, that was used during the Salem Witch Trials. There is a plaque to the town family in the Minster, that was unveiled in 2011, and it was actually the town family from California. When they were researching their family tree and they discovered that they came from Great Yarmouth, they actually paid to have it erected in the Minster. It's right at the back of the Minster, but it's still there, acknowledging at least something. But again, Roger Silver has actually campaigned, and a blue plaque is going up on the north side of the Minster.
Oh wow, yes.
Because it was recently discovered that now the common sort of thought is that if you were hanged as a criminal or as a witch, that you were not allowed to be buried in consecrated ground. Witches were normally buried at crossroads, and you find that all over Europe, especially sort of in England and Scotland. But it was recently discovered that Alice Criswell, Maria Blackburn, Elizabeth Dudgeon, Elizabeth Bradwell, and Brigitte Howard were all buried together in the north side of Great Yarmouth Minster churchyard.
Oh wow.
I think that they deserve to be named. They deserve to have their stories told and their names spoken.
How did the witch trial hysteria end then? When did these horrendous trials stop?
In England and Scotland, it kind of petered out after Hopkins went. It wasn't exactly fair because nobility would have had astrologers, which basically fell into the same sort of law and rule, because technically it was classed as witchcraft, especially after the restoration of the monarchy as well. You then go into like the Enlightenment, and people are kind of waking up to the fact that, you know, not everything is attributed to the devil. The Witchcraft Act that James I brought in was then changed in 1735 to, it was still classed as the Witchcraft Act, but it was no longer punishable by death.
Oh, right.
And it's what's really interesting is that Act stayed in for nearly 200 years.
Yes,
you know, it was
because it was used in the 20th century, wasn't it?
Yeah. So the last ever person to be imprisoned under the Witchcraft Act was a lady called Helen Duncan. She'd done an evening of psychic demonstration, and she'd given away details of a sailor who had died on the HMS Barham. On that evening that she gave that information, it wasn't public knowledge that the HMS Barham had sunk. So therefore, she was kind of in trouble with the MOD and the Official Secrets Act, and that whole phrase of loose lips sink ships. Now, because they couldn't try her as a spy, the only thing that they could imprison her for was the Witchcraft Act. So she was actually the last witch to be imprisoned in 1941. She was released, and then she was then brought up again, but it was then under the new law, which was the Witchcraft Act was repealed in 1951, and it was changed to the Fraudulent Mediums Act. She was imprisoned again. She died shortly after she was released. That's a history, you know, from sort of the 16th century onwards.
Thank you so much, Becky. It's really interesting hearing your knowledge and your research and how it all ties locally from Little Yarmouth all the way over the pond to America and back again.
I love talking about it as well, because it's a little bit of unknown Yarmouth history.
Thank you for joining me again today, Becci, and I look forward to future chats on paganism, history, local history. Look after yourself.
You too. Thanks ever so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Meet the makers. I'm joined now by Jenn from the Fibre Workshop, who specialises in natural dyeing, historic textile mix, and working with the Norfolk Horn, Jenn. Jenn, what combination? So, Jenn, what first interested you in working with a heritage breed like the Norfolk Horn, which is a sheep for clarification purposes?
My background, I come into sort of the woolcraft through spinning, and as a spinner, of course, I'm interested in wool and sheep. And the local farm to us, Green Farm, kept Norfolk Horn. And I remember walking through the footpath by their farm, and I saw the bizarrest looking sheep I have ever seen. I thought they were goats.
So what is it about their appearance that is so different? What is that?
They're amazing. Well, they have these beautiful black, they look like they're wearing silk stockings, and they're quite small sheep. They have these most amazing horns. They're not your traditional woolly white jobs. They have these black faces and these wonderful horns, which are kind of sort of swept back, and that's in sort of the Rams avenues. Just thought, what are they? So then I went and found out what they were, and they were Norfolk's indigenous breed of sheep, and discovered that they're one of our oldest breeds of sheep. They came over with the Anglo-Saxons, the original Anglo-Saxon settlers. There's a theory that you can still see their ancestors, but the heath sheep from over in the lowlands, north of Denmark, all the heaths around there. So they're an incredibly old breed. And the more I found out, the more I find that they're so intertwined with Norfolk's own history. Without the Norfolk Horn, there wouldn't have been a worsted industry. Without the Norfolk Horn, there wouldn't have been the agricultural revolution that we have. Without the Norfolk Horn, we wouldn't have had the Suffolk, which is the go-to ram for all of our lamb that we have today.
It's amazing. And it all comes back from the Anglo-Saxons, bringing them over for settlement purposes.
The sheep that we have today, not forgetting though, because the Norfolk Horn as was effectively extinct by the end of the 1940s. There was only a few surviving left, but because their genetics were in the Suffolk, and it was an accidental outbreeding experiment by Adam Hansen off of what is off of Country File.
Oh yes.
His dad Joe.
Oh yes.
He was pushing through the rare breeds, the whole kind of rare breed survival movement. And of course, the Norfolk Horn was one of their like flagship breeds, most in need of help. So once again, the Norfolk Horn put Norfolk firmly on the map because it kick-started that whole rare breed movement and the whole rare breed survival trust.
No, I love that. So in the 1940s, we nearly lost this breed completely after having been here for hundreds of years.
It was through outbreeding from the Suffolk that we now have what we've known as the new Norfolk.
When did you start working with it?
I wanted to do something different, something a lot more sustainable, something that would actually appeal to or would actually help me with my environmentalism, and to do something that was sort of ethical, sustainable, and sort of rooted, I suppose.
Sorry to interrupt, Jenn, but just to pick up on that, so many of the makers I'm talking to who work in traditional crafts or heritage crafts have sustainable ideals and beliefs as well. It's inherently linked.
Absolutely. Overwhelming drive. It's at the core of what I do. It's always underpinned what I've done. But then through sort of working with the sort of the spinning side of things, and you come in contact with lots of smallholders and people that keep small flocks of sheep, and you talk to them about what they do with their fleeces. And then I kind of went off and had a look and realised that there's no market for this stuff. It's being burnt or composted, or it's tragic that they can't derive any economic value from this product. And it is a product, it's not a waste product, yet we perceive it as a waste product. British wool, as it is now known. They're kind of excluded because they can't produce enough. So I thought, I just got really angry. And then I thought, do you know what I'm going to do?
Yes, I love an angry woman.
Angry. I got so angry that I just thought, you know, and I wanted to educate people about, you know, what was going on and about wool and why it was, you know, why it's an amazing, sustainable, you know, usable material, and also about Norfolk wool history and, you know, and about rare breeds. So it was just like a perfect storm that kind of came together, and I just thought, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy fleece from small farmers, people that are committed. You know, I'm going to help them, and I'm going to produce a yarn. And so the first time I did it was an experiment. So I spoke to sort of people at Gresson Hall Museum of who were amazing. They've been just so supportive.
I think that's the first time I saw you, Jen, and we didn't know each other then. I think I came and you had your dyed yarns on display for sale, and I think I might have even bought one. I think we must have had a nice chat and all that kind of stuff. But that was our first connection, Jen. The Fibre Workshop. Pandemic aside, you run courses and workshops in natural dyeing.
Woad especially.
I know, right? So you're my go-to woad when I come out with what do we call them? Pink granny stockings.
Oh, what flesh-coloured tights.
Yes, when your woad goes wrong. Oh, yeah. You grow your own woad?
I do, and it's a bit of an obsession. Again, huge link with Norfolk's agricultural past. Ian Howard at Beatley, who had the Woad Incorporated, I think it was, and the Woad Centre. Bought my first packet of seeds from him. He gave us a talk at our guild, the Mid Norfolk Guild of Spinners, Weavers and Dyers.
A fantastic guild, highly recommended.
It was the same thing that happened when I saw the Norfolk Horn. Something just goes click. So I got some seeds, grew some woad, did it myself. Next year, grew more. The year after, grew a bit more.
Yay!
As part of my the Fibre Workshop, I want to be sort of as sufficient as I can in my own dye stuff. So, which I am with the woad, and now I'm creating an excess. And then I started teaching people because I had the crop, so I wanted to just educate people. So I started running workshops, and from that came natural dye workshops.
Because there is an art, obviously there is an art to it. It's a real science as well. Get your pH papers out, Jen. You know you love that.
Yeah. Or is it slippery? It's got to be slippery.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You just imagine that, you know, in back in the day, they were doing all this expertly without thermometers, without pH papers. It all comes into play. It feeds all your senses. It's smell, texture, you know, everything about it. As I say, it's every single dye stuff has its own particular characteristic, and like you just, I know your views on.
Go on. Work. Yes, you're quite partial to a bit of woad smell, aren't you, Jen?
It's all part of it. That kind of. But then I will say, I only do my dyeing outside, and I only do it summer season thing. I don't do it in the house anymore. It's it's an outside thing, and it's a seasonally dependent thing for me. So
that is one thing that I have discovered on my new little journey into natural dyeing is the cacophony of different smells, and it does take me right back. I think, well, this is talk about authenticity. This has got to be an authentic smell from the past. Apart from, I don't usually add urine to any of my dye process, so you know there is an added layer that I'm missing out on there, or am I don't know.
So for me, with what I do was professionally, I need it to be sort of done as efficiently as possible.
So once it's spun, dyed, you create beautiful textiles, Jen.
So I knit with it, I weave with it, crochet with it. I just look at what I can do with this fleece, with this wool, because obviously not all fleeces are equal, and not all parts of the fleece are equal. So the good bits because I do all my own sorting and everything, so I do all my own sorting.
Different bits together.
I'll do the grading, and the good stuff goes off to my mill. I use a fantastic mill. It's in Yorkshire. There are no mills in Norfolk, sadly. No. But there's a reason for that, because processing raw fleece takes a phenomenal amount of water.
So Jan, tell me about it.
Well, because I've been researching the Norfolk Horn history and I'm writing a little bookie, I really wanted to look at sort of the role of women in the worsted industry, the early medieval worsted industry. So I applied to the Costume and Textile Association for their bursary, and I won it. I got it. So for the past year, 18 months, I've been researching the role of women in the early medieval wool industry. You know, what was worsted before it was worsted? Looking at specifically Norfolk, or worsted became worsted. I was going to write a paper on it, but because of the Rona, the whole Rona thing, and the inability to travel and to access all the sort of as much of the archive material as I'd hoped to, I had to change the research slightly. So I'm going to be able to produce a booklet. I've been spending so much time the past 18 months from the early medieval Anglo-Saxon period, and a little bit afterwards, before Norfolk and Norwich became well known and associated with what became known as worsted textiles. So I've been spending a lot of time researching that, and of course, obviously, you can't, go back in time. You have to make up the stories based on what evidence that you've got. So, but fortunately, we've got an awful lot of evidence from there. So I'm looking at particularly women's lives, because at the beginning of the period, it was entirely, textiles were entirely the woman's sphere, a female sphere. It was well respected. So you start off early sort of Anglo-Saxon with it being a completely sort of equal but different with the gentlemen. We were just as well respected but differently respected, and you kind of follow it through and look at where we end up at the end of the period, where new looms, sit down job, man's work. Thinking about it, and of course looking at like the wider social history and what else is actually happening at the same time, it's more complicated than that. Although it's very easy to just assume as soon as it becomes like, if you look at the evolution of the looms from that transient warp weighted loom to the tube beam, and then onwards to the actual sort of the horizontal sit down loom. It's very easy to say as soon as it became something that was economic, it became, sort of, and technical. It was like, the next process, stand back, woman. This is a man's job.
Yeah.
But there's a load of other social and cultural things that are happening at the same time. At the same time, in Norfolk is an oddity compared to the rest of England, because we had an astonishing amount of freeholding peasants. So we weren't really subject to that kind of manorial control that was going on elsewhere.
That explains so much about Norfolk people.
At the same time, so you've got this incredibly free population, have property and own land, and with that, you've also got like the rights of inheritance, where they kind of subdivide their land. Right. You've got a growing population, so there's an awful lot of fragmenting of land holdings. We've got a really, really vibrant land market going on at the same time. So as time goes on, it's becoming more and more difficult for traditional ways of life to support yourself. So where the tradition was, you had the man's sphere, where he would go out and he would be maintaining the land, farming the crops, whereas the woman would be producing the textiles, making the home, growing all the food, keeping the kids and all everything else going on. But the man's role and his ability to support that traditional unit is being eroded. So they have to find, and at the same time, they're moving into more urban population pockets. So you're forced as a sort of traditional family unit to find alternatives where you can no longer support yourself using traditional methods. And one of those would be if you've got a loom that now needs to take up a room, that needs to justify the cost, and you've got one member who happens to be, male, that needs to support the family doing something alternative, and the women folk can get on with doing what they're doing, but because what they're doing, like with the spinning, is, undertaken I've got 10 minutes, I'll just whip my spindle out and do it. She can't go away from her task to spend 8 hours sat on a loom.
Oh, well, good luck with your endeavours, Jen, and enjoy the rest of your day researching, crafting. Gosh, we can never be bored, will we?
I'm never bored, that's the problem.
Have a lovely day, Jen. Thank you for your time.
Take care.
Contemplation Corner. Joining me now is the most gorgeous human being, Shirley, who runs Healing at Heart Therapies. Now, Shirley is able to find trapped emotions within the body, releasing them, allowing you to heal and have a happy and healthy life. Hello, Shirley.
Hello.
I'm so glad to talk to you today because you have worked with me for a little while.
Yes, just a little while.
Just a little while.
A few sessions, and I've loved every single one of them. And yeah, so emotion code therapy, Shirley, what is it? So emotion code, it's basically, as you go through life, you collect trapped emotions. So you feel emotional with every situation that happens. So when you have that emotion and you're not able to release it there and then, it can get trapped in the body. So all I do is find that emotion for that one situation, because you can only do one at a time, and find out when it was and release it. And then that is generally, a particular emotion is linked to a particular organ within the body. So then you can release it, and then that helps that so it can stay healthy.
So emotion code therapy, where does it come from? How did it start, please?
So Dr. Bradley Nelson was a chiropractic physician, and he just basically was trying to search for people who were struggling with emotions and disease, and he found this emotion code. And he's developed it and brought it to where it is today. Over in America, this is quite a big thing, where over here it's not as known as much, but there is quite a few of us over here.
Yeah.
Like me, certificated.
Yeah.
So he worked very hard from his chiropractic business all them years ago, to get this rolling, and it worked with so many people, and it helped so many people, and it helps people and animals.
Oh wow, yeah, go on.
You can do it on your pets as well.
Oh
yeah, so if your pet's struggling with anything, you can work on your pets as well, because I have found some pets, they struggle just from leaving their mother.
Oh.
And they pick up emotions from leaving their mother, which is really, really, well, you wouldn't want to leave your mum, would you, at a yearly young age, like 8 weeks?
No. Well, I wonder if that's what happened with my cat, because she is a grumpy old doodah, but it's all mouth, because she will growl and grumble and grate, but if you pick her up and give her a cuddle, she'll start purring, so there's nothing to it. And she also doesn't really know she's a cat, doesn't like other cats. So
Love her.
So have you done a lot of therapy on animals, Shirley?
I've done a few pets.
Yeah, so dogs being left at home springs to mind. That can be quite traumatic for them.
Yeah.
How would you help in that sort of instance?
You'd have to, in that case, when it's a pet, you have to get permission off the owner of the pet. And then you just do the same thing.
Yeah.
And then you can find out, when it was. And then the owner will be, oh, yeah, that was this. Or that was that.
Oh,
blah, blah,
gosh.
blah.
So the owner can sort of verify the incident that might have caused that trapped emotion.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
poor
it's-
little doggos.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. I've done some work on. We've got 2 cats now,
Oh, yes.
and I've done a little bit of work on them, and yeah, that definitely helps. This is the good thing with the body, though. The body will
Yes.
only let you release what you're able to cope with. So one person might only get 3 or 4 emotions released, yet another person could get 12. See, if you get like 3 emotions,
Yeah.
it could be that huge. Each one is a really
Oh, I
big,
see, yes.
big thing. Where
Yeah.
if you're getting 12,
12,
there are
yes.
lots of smaller ones that
Yes.
have built up.
And so when you're trying to find the trapped emotion, you ask questions, don't you?
Yes.
Very specific questions. So could you give us an example of the question to find a trapped emotion could be?
For example,
Yep.
does Jen have a trapped emotion that we can release now relating to having a bad back? Relating to her bad back. And then I would do it through kinesiology, because you can do it so many ways with your arm out. You can do it with your fingers. You
Wow.
can do as the links, the circles. But mine is just like spinning on the fingers. I find that the easiest way to get my answers through kinesiology. And then you have a chart that you go through. So you'd ask that question. And then you'd say, is it in column A or B? And then is it in an odd number or an even number? So then you find a box and that'll have 5 emotions in it. And then within them 5 emotions, you'll break it down to 1. And that's how you get it.
And what was really interesting is the emotions aren't always negative. It could be joy or overwhelm.
Yeah. So, yeah, you can have anything and it links to all different parts of the body. So if it's in the heart, it can be things like abandonment. But then overjoy, like you say, is in that as well. And effort unreceived and heartache, insecurity, vulnerability. So they're all ones that are related to that area, just that one area.
Amazing. So the emotions can be stored anywhere in the body, but when they're stored in the body, it relates to a particular organ, and by releasing them, you're helping that organ to heal. And some of the emotions can not be yours.
Yes.
And this has been really interesting. And then they're called inherited. Is that right?
Yeah. You have some that are inherited and some that are absorbed. If they're inherited, you get it from mum or dad, and then it goes back through the generations. So it can go back 4 or 5 generations. It can, I think we've had one.
Oh, gosh.
That's gone back loads, isn't it? And that was 600 odd years.
600 years. So that means that I've been carrying an emotion that has gone through 600 years worth of people.
Yes.
Well, you're welcome to those people. But now it's gone.
Yeah,
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
See, tis but a burden.
This is it.
But an absorbing emotion. So what's absorbing?
So absorbing is when, it's like, you know, when you throw a stone into the sea and you have that ripple.
Yes.
So someone can feel an emotion so strongly and then it ripples. So then you're in that, you're feeling that emotion for that close friend, that family member. So then you're absorbing that emotion as well and taking that on as well. Yeah, that can have effect on you as well. So by releasing that as well, that can help you have a happier and healthier life.
And that's so interesting with the absorbing, because I do think being an empath like yourself, Shirley, we've got to protect ourselves and not try and absorb things that will make us feel bad, but hiding it. But
yeah, that is important, isn't it, to protect yourself.
How would you do that, Shirley? What would you recommend?
What you can do, you can put, this is something I learned off Donna Eden actually, there's a daily energy routine she does, and I've got that on my page. A bit that will protect you like in that way is you put a finger on your belly button. I know some people don't like touching their belly button, so you can do it just slightly above if need be, but it's meant to be on the belly button, and then in the middle of your forehead between your eyebrows, and press in and up. Take a deep breath in and breathe. So breathe in through your nose, deep breath, and then blow out through your mouth. And then if you yawn...
I didn't yawn.
It doesn't matter. That's all right. Just do it. Maybe do it again.
Oh, I'm doing it because you're telling me to yawn.
I just do it naturally because I've been doing it for so long now.
What does it mean then?
That means that's connected. That means it's all connected. So then you're like got your little protection ball around you. Yeah. So that's really nice. I quite like that. I recommend the daily energy routine. It's definitely helped me. Definitely been a positive.
Oh. So not just protection in general. At this time, there's so much disconnected, kind of grief and anxiety that it's in the air. Feeling people's fears for what's going on at the moment. So yeah, protecting yourself is really important at the moment in particular.
Oh yeah, definitely agree with that.
So I don't mind talking about how you've helped me a little bit, because some of the things that have come to the fore have been, like you say, generational ones. And what's really interesting is I had a lot around certain ages.
Yeah.
When life bombs and stuff like that. But when I was working in a school, we had a lot from pupils as well. So I absorbed some of their emotions, didn't I?
You did.
Really interesting. Some of the emotions absorbed were things like stubbornness. And I thought, oh yeah, I can picture who you're talking about there. But through your
kinesiology, yeah.
Through the kinesiology, you ask yes or no questions.
Yeah.
And so we can really pin it down to, is it this person? And you can get a yes or no answer that you've absorbed the emotion from. And that's so interesting.
Yeah. Everyone's different. Will react in different ways to it, to let it go. So it's a case of it's leaving the body through one route or another. So if it's through belching or through...
just belching, that's what it's through, nothing else.
Other ways,
ways, yeah.
It is what it is, but it's how your body chooses to release it.
So you've been working with me via video during the pandemic, and you connect with me when you do your therapy. Is that the same in a real life situation? Would you connect in that same way, or if I was in the same room, how would that work?
Well, you can do it kinesiology where I do it where you have the arm, and then you press down on the arm for yes or no, which is the most commonly known way for kinesiology. See, in person it can be different because you don't need to connect if you're doing it with your arm. Because of this outbreak, I'm probably more experienced with the distance way of doing it. But you can do it like that when you're sitting near each other still. You have to have permission for connection. You have to get the permission of the person who you're working on to be able to work on them. It is different. It's not for everybody. I like it that it's different.
It's something that you have to go through and experience to feel it working on you, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so to help release the emotions, you use a magnet, a stone.
I would run it down the centre of your back, so it would go down your spine. And then generally, I have found people have said on the third stroke.
Yeah.
But if it's inherited.
Yes.
If it's inherited, an emotion.
Yes.
Then you do 10.
Whoa.
Because it's going through you
and
going through those people that it went through. So you're releasing it from them as well. And it has been known, there's been spiritual people gone to Dr. Bradley Nelson's seminars, and they've said, like, they can see the extra people who it's gone through in the family on the stage. And I was like, that's amazing. I love that. And then as it's released, and he goes, that's released, they disappear, they go. So I'm so intrigued by that. The thing of it is, you've had all your years lived on this, lovely earth to collect all the emotions you've had from all that time.
Yeah.
So lots of people have got lots, of emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, the heart wall is something they say to start with, which...
What's the heart wall, Shirley? Oh, right, let's go in that, because...
Yeah, the heart wall is when you build relationships, even from a youngster, like with your mum and dad, to siblings, to anyone, if something happens, each situation that happens that upsets you, you're putting a brick in your wall.
Ooh.
So over a period of time, you'll get this big heart wall that's protecting your heart, just so it doesn't break as such. So it's a case of, it can help you find love if you're single and you really want to meet someone. That's an area I would start with, a heart wall, because that'll help you be more open. It can make you see exactly the same situation but look at it in a different way. So then, because you've done that, the relationship can then move forward. There was one lady, when I was training, I watched a video and it said that she did her heart wall. The day that she completed that heart wall, a chap that she had worked on rang her, but she'd worked on him a while back because he really liked her and wanted to date her. But it wasn't until her heart wall was down that she was able to accept that. And I thought that was the most beautiful story. I really liked that. And I was like, that's amazing. I'd love to do that for somebody. Definitely one of the worthwhile things.
What other situations have you worked with that aren't purely emotion based?
That's the same thing. You just say, do we have a trapped emotion that we can release now? Well, this is the way I do it, that we can release now, relating to migraines. Are there any trapped emotions we can release? Yeah. And then see what comes up.
Yeah.
And if you get a yes, there are some trapped emotions, then you can move forward with that. But sometimes you ask it and that says no, because you're not asking it in the right way.
Oh yes, yeah, we've had this where the question's not phrased exactly correctly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you don't phrase it right, you're not going to be able to work on it, because you haven't asked it in the right way.
Yeah.
So that's quite fun as well sometimes, working that out.
Love.
But there is, Dr. Bradley Nelson's got a book.
Yes.
He's got two, actually.
Yes.
He's got an updated version called The Body Code.
Yes.
So you can even get the book and read that and do it yourself.
Oh, I think I'm going to have a go.
But I absolutely love it. Really
I can tell that, and you're the sort of person, Shirley, who just loves helping other people, and so to be able to help them in this way, where you are helping them move forwards in different ways in their life, it's just such a wonderful moment. You've trained and you've worked hard on this. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today, Shirley, and if people want to get in touch and find out more, how can they do that?
I've got a Facebook page called Healing at Heart that I pop things on, that if I find anything that I think's interesting that I'd like to share with others, I pop on there. There's my phone number on there as well. If you want to contact me, please feel free to do that if you would like to, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But yeah, that's just something I enjoy. It's not really work, is it? It's just helping someone, which is great in itself.
And you're so good at it, Shirley.
Thank you.
And I think you got a client for life here. I'm very grateful for your help. Thank you, Shirley.
Thank you.
And in next week's podcast, I talk with history students and Wohoo authenticity officer Katie about how to research from archaeological documents.
They ripped it up, covered it in tar, and then shoved it in all the little gaps to block any water coming through.
Meet the Makers is a popular choice for reenactors. It's the Iceni Meadery, where Bob and Joe work hard to produce a range of delicious meads and put on markets outside their meadery.
Right, this year we've spoken to the estate manageress, and we've been given permission to have some more markets, which is a great thing.
And in Contemplation Corner, a full moon reading from Adam. You've been listening to a Drakos Dottir podcast for entertainment purposes. A massive thank you to all my guests today. All music for the podcast series provided by the amazing Dark Bardess. Find her on YouTube. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your company next time.
Drömde mig i dröm i natt och såg jag oändligt bra. Drömde mig i dröm i natt och såg jag oändligt bra. I dreamed a dream last night of silk and feathers. I dreamed a dream last night of silk